It is past time to start pruning these tomatoes. Let's go. Hey friends, it's Kendall, your joyful farmer, here in the high tunnel today to show you how and why we prune these tomatoes, and to help you make some decisions about pruning that you might want to do to your own tomatoes. So tomatoes have different types of growth habits. There's indeterminate, determinate, and semi-determinate plants. First, let me mention determinate and semi-determinate plants. Determinate plants grow at a bush habit, and they have a finite, set amount of fruit that they can grow in their lifetime. And their branches terminate in a bloom. What this means is that they will grow, set fruit, there's my friend, they'll grow, set fruit, and they'll produce all that fruit at once so that you'll have one big harvest of tomatoes. Because they grow in a bush habit, they're a lot easier to grow with just the support of a cage, or you can do an easy trellising technique like the Florida weave. Semi-determinate plants grow a little bit taller than determinate plants, and they will sometimes have multiple flushes of fruit. But their branches also terminate in blooms. There are also tomatoes called dwarf tomatoes and micro dwarf tomatoes, and those are much smaller plants. They're kind of cute, and they're a lot easier to tame with just a small tomato cage or a stake, or sometimes no support at all. With all of these types of tomatoes, so determinate, semi-determinate, dwarf tomatoes, and micro dwarf tomatoes, pruning is not going to be necessary. In fact, if you prune a determinate tomato plant, you're actually eliminating potential fruit, which was going to grow anyway. So you might as well just leave it on there. What I'm pruning and trellising today are indeterminate tomato plants, and that's really what I want to talk to you about today. They have a vining growth habit, and they have an undetermined size and an undetermined amount of fruit that they'll grow. So potentially, they'll grow forever and ever. Usually that's not the case because there are things like disease, drought, and frost that end their life. But when you're deciding whether or not you want to prune your indeterminate tomato plants, there's a few different things to consider. You got to consider where you're growing them, the support that you're giving them, the spacing that you're giving them, and also the size of fruit that you want. If you live where summers are humid, airflow is going to be really important to help you prevent disease, especially blight, on your plants. Pruning is what really increases airflow, so you may want to consider pruning to one lead stem and then also eliminating the branches that are below the fruit that's setting. But if you live someplace drier like we do, you might be able to get away with moderate amounts of pruning or little pruning. I prune my tomato plants at least the first 18 inches off of the ground to make sure that there's no splashback of soil onto leaves. But after that, I can get away with just leaving them alone as long as I prune them to 1 or 2 lead stems. No matter what your climate's like, I would highly recommend vertically trellising your indeterminate tomato plants. No matter what your climate is, I would highly recommend vertically trellising your indeterminate tomato plants just to help keep them under control. Cages are really not the best supports for indeterminate plants. It just creates this vining jungle. The vines go everywhere and it's really hard to manage and maintain. For spacing, usually at least 18 inches to 24 inches is recommended between plants if you're pruning. In our more arid climate, I've been able to get away with spacing my plants 12 inches apart, pruning to 1 to 2 lead stems, and as long as I feed my soil well, I haven't dealt with any issues with growth or disease or anything like that. Also, pruning can have a big influence on the size of tomatoes that your plants can produce. The more suckers that you allow to grow, the more fruit the plant will produce, and the more fruit it's producing at one time, the less energy that plant has to be able to deliver energy and nutrients to create larger size fruit. So if you let an indeterminate tomato plant go, a lot of times you're going to get smaller fruit. If you really want to max out the size of the fruit that you're going to get off of your plant, what you want to do is prune to 1 lead stem, make sure you eliminate suckers as it grows, and take off any of the leaves that are below the fruit that is setting. That's really going to allow your plant to deliver the most energy to the fruit and help it grow. Cherry tomatoes are a little bit different. I found that the fruit size is really not affected by whether or not you heavily prune. So you can really let a cherry tomato plant go at a certain point and it will still produce the same size tomatoes. So this year, because my goals are to maximize space and to also maximize the size of the fruit that I'm trying to get, I really want some big fat tomatoes. What I'm doing is I'm spacing them 12 inches apart. I'm going to prune them to one lead stem, and I'm going to make sure to prune the lower leaves that are below the fruit that's being set as it grows up the trellis. Typically out in the big garden, I've always had a hard time pruning to one stem. I see those lead stems as potential fruit, and I really like to eat tomatoes, so it's been really hard for me to come to grips with the fact that I'm really going to have to pare down the number of fruit that the plants are going to be producing to increase the quality and the size. But I'm going to make sure to be really brutal and keep these pruned to one stem this year, keeping the suckers trimmed off and the lower leaves pruned so that I have really nice big size fruit, and also to maintain airflow in here since there is a little bit of higher risk of disease being in a high tunnel. And hopefully it will also keep the plants nice and easy to manage and maintain. So let me bring you in closer and show you exactly how I'm going to prune these plants. Y'all, these are a hot mess. I have not touched these, and it's probably been 4 weeks since I've planted them out. I am not used to having to prune tomatoes this early in the year, and I'm not used to them growing this fast either. It seems like they've grown faster in the high tunnel because the soil's been so much warmer. But these are a hot mess. You can see there's leaves all over the place. They're touching the ground. So my goal with each one is going to be to take off, as brutal as it is, I'm going to take off all the suckers and any other stems that are trying to stick around. So first I'm going to get rid of all of these lower leaves so you can really see the plant and what's going on here. Okay, so you can see that there's one stem that's larger than the other, so I'm going to go ahead and use my nice sharp pruners to get the other stems off. You really want to avoid breaking off any branches because it's going to be harder for that plant to recover if there are some open wounds going on. But you can see just off of that plant that I should have pruned probably 3 weeks ago, or started pruning at least. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I got 7 of these suckers, which we're trying to turn into stems. And what I could do with these is this is 7 more potential tomato plants. So if I wanted to, I could root them in by putting them in a jar of water and just let them sit, and they would develop more adventitious roots off of the stems so that they could then be transplanted. I don't need more tomato plants right now, so I probably won't do that, but there you go. All right, you can also see on this plant that I am not done pruning because there are some more suckers. This is one that's really easy to see. If this is my main stem, this is the sucker that's coming off. So I have the leaf that's coming off of the main stem, and then in the little armpit of where the leaf connects to the main stem, that's where the sucker tends to grow. They start off really small, but then if you ignore them, they get large really quickly. So there's number 8 off of this one plant. And if you check on this side, this is actually a really big sucker as well. So I'm going to get rid of that one. And my very first fruit that is set is going to be here. So you can see I have my first little cluster of blossoms. And because I have quite a bit of growth here at the top, I've got 2 really nice big size green leaves. I think I am going to go ahead and just get rid of the lower leaves. This is some pretty brutal pruning just for one day on this plant, but it's going to be able to grow really nicely and produce some nice big fruit for me. And if I zoom in a little bit more, you can see that there's even more pruning that I need to do if I want to keep it to one main stem, because here I've got another tiny sucker and here's one as well. So I'm going to just get this one with my fingers, pinch it with my fingernail, and then this one's a little bit bigger, so I'll go ahead and use my pruners on that one. And I've got another set of fruit developing. So that's great. I'm going to leave these lower leaves though below that fruit because I want these leaves to help photosynthesize and help out this fruit that's closest to it right here. What I'm using to tie up my tomato plants today is one of my very favorite things, and it is this Velcro tape that you can just get off of Amazon. It used to only be available, I think, from the Velcro brand, but now some other manufacturers have started making it. So I really love these pieces of Velcro tape. I can just clip a piece off and wrap it around super easy. And this one I'm going to go ahead and tie off between the two largest leaves and just wrap it around. And if I needed to undo it, it's pretty easy to undo. Now let's see if I can do the others before the sun goes down. So there you have it. The massacre of leaves on the ground. But they're all done. And down here on the end, I wanted to show you one more thing. And down here on the end, you might notice that this little guy doesn't have a string. That's because he is actually a dwarf determinate. This is a purple rain tomato. It's a really, really good one. And Luke's gonna come say hi too. But the dwarf tomatoes, I would not prune. But what I will do is get rid of lower leaves. So what you don't want is the leaves touching the soil, because that's where you can get some issues happening. So I'm just gonna prune the lower leaves, making sure that I'm not getting any suckers. But really this is as much as I'll prune this guy. I might, when he gets a little bit bigger, if his lower leaves are touching the soil or are really close, I'll probably trim some more back. But what we don't want is when we water or when it rains for there to be splashback of soil that gets on the lower leaves that can cause issues. And there's my little helper. So thanks for joining me for the tomato pruning massacre of 2024 here in the high tunnel. I wish you joy on your journey, and I'll see you next time. Isn't that brand new?